Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jim Roy. I'm the Executive Director for the American College Center for Veteran Affairs. Welcome to the American College Center for Veteran Affairs inaugural leadership webinar titled Building Your Team. This is another way for us to thank those who continue to support our military and our military families, and certainly the center. Let me start by recognizing the United States Marine Corps as we help them celebrate 246 years of faithful service to our nation. Semper Fi, Marines. I'd also ask us to take a moment to pause as we prepare for Veterans Day tomorrow. We have an outstanding panel and moderator for you today. Our moderator is Heather Nauert. Heather served as spokesperson for the Department of State under Secretaries Pompeo and Tillerson. She reported domestic and international for Fox and ABC News for 20 years. Today, she is a corporate communication advisor who also works closely with veterans groups to evacuate Afghans and resettle them to the United States. Heather, over to you.
All right, Jim, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. As Jim and I were talking before this started, we have more people joining online than from any symposium held before by the American College. So thank you for your participation, and especially thanks to all of our veterans who are joining us today. We'd like to honor those veterans and those past, present, and who will go on to serve this great nation in the future. We have a terrific lineup and a great topic today, and it is building your team, diversity, equality, and performance. Let me introduce you to our panelists representing three of our service branches, Army, Navy, and Air Force, but we did recognize the Marines, and I'm sure we have some Coasties out there as well. Let me start by introducing Dr. Tracey Jones. Tracey served as a major in the United States Air Force for 12 years. She is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, an incredible, incredible school. I love all the ladies I've ever met from the Air Force Academy, and men too, by the way. She is the president of a company called Tremendous Leadership. She's the author of numerous books. The latest book that Tracey has written is called Message to Millennials: What Your Parents Didn't Teach You and What Employers Need to Know. That's something I think we can all learn from. She's an expert in organizational leadership, and she's worked at Northrop Grumman, the National Security Agency, and others. I should also mention she served our country during the Gulf War from Germany and also from England. Tracey, great to be with you. Before we get started with you, let me continue introducing all of our panelists here. Next up, we have Admiral Scott Moore. Scott served for many years in the U.S. Navy. He went on to lead SEAL Team 6. He conducted more than 2,000 missions against enemy leaders during his time in the military. He's done every job from being a SEAL Team platoon commander to the deputy commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. Scott has been responsible for training more than 7,000 of our best men in the U.S. Navy. And in addition to that, equipping them as well. Now, what some of you may not know about Scott is that in 2009, he led an incredibly dangerous mission to rescue Americans and others from pirates off the coast of Somalia. Many of you will remember the story of Captain Phillips and the Maersk, Alabama. Scott and his team are the reason that our folks were safe today. Today, Scott runs a company called the Karakoram Group, where he advises corporations, CEOs, and others all around the world. So Scott, thank you for joining. And finally, we have Greg Gadson. Greg Gadson served as a colonel in the U.S. Army for many years. His final posting was as a garrison commander at Fort Belvoir in Maryland. Greg served in every major conflict the United States has been involved in over the past 20 years. But it was in 2007 in which Greg was serving in Iraq, and a IED went off, taking both of his legs just above the knee. As a result, Greg also lost the normal use of his right arm and hand. Despite all of that, he went on to serve active duty for 7 more years, and he retired in 2014. Today, he advises corporations, nonprofits, sports teams, and others. And I should mention is a West Point graduate. I should also mention that Scott is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, despite joining the Navy. So thank you to all of you, an incredible panel. And we're going to start with giving some opening remarks from each of you, and then we'll go into question and answer. And to our audience here, we have gotten some great questions in, so we'll incorporate those into our conversation today. We're going to start with Greg. And Greg is going to talk about how we instill our values and ethics into leading a team and demonstrating who we are as an organization. Greg, why don't you go right ahead?
Well, thank you, Heather. We focus so much on leadership from the perspective of what we should be doing, as an individual, and that is important. It's important to have self-awareness and understand and appreciate how others might perceive you, not just what you feel you're transmitting or displaying. But to me, it really kind of starts with clear communication, expectations of what our values are, what's not negotiable, and then ultimately we begin to live it, and we begin to hold ourselves accountable for it. And so it cannot ever be negotiable, in my opinion. And where we get sideways, where we get off track, is when we have selective enforcement of what our values are and what we stand for and what we mean. And what I would just kind of not close, but just sort of summarize quickly, Heather, is this: you have to own it, and your subordinates have to own it, and owning it means that you're enforcing it, and you're holding the organization accountable. It can never be compromised, and that's one of the mantras of leadership that just is relentless, and why you have to be on guard and vigilant with respect to maintaining those values.
Greg, you also mentioned the importance of teamwork, and that no one person is more important than another. And I think that's something that's lost on a lot of folks in corporations now, where they tend to think of the CEO as being the most important leader. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. Again, thanks, Heather. It is. For me, leadership is about servant leadership and the sense of responsibility that I'm working for my organization. I am working for my organization and the individuals that make up that team to be successful. Understanding when I need to be out of the way so they can be brilliant, and understanding when I need to step in. Very significant to me was a simple choice that I had to make before I deployed to Iraq in 2007. Unfortunately, my medic had been injured, and we didn't have a replacement medic to replace him. The non-commissioned officers in my organization selected a young man who was out of his MOS, out of his basic skill, and sent him to a 2-week course at Kansas State University. Ultimately, they came to me with the suggestion of putting this young man in one of my subordinate platoons, and me pulling up a school-trained medic. And I didn't make that choice. I kept that young man on a couple of bases. First, I didn't want to disrupt the teamwork that had been accomplished prior to our deployment. And secondly, and more importantly, if he was good enough for my soldiers, I felt he was good enough for me. He would ultimately be the young man that the doctors give credit for saving my life after I was born.
So sometimes youth or experience does not necessarily contribute to success. Sometimes it's, who you are in your training and you having faith in that young man. You also mentioned poise poise and who you are every day. Now, I wouldn't look at a strong man like you who played football for Army as I wouldn't associate poise with that necessarily. What do you mean by that?
Well, for me, poise is it is, we think of those pressure situations and we want our leaders to be calm and have example, and that is an element of poise. But to me, what gets us there, what enables us to have that poise is really the strength of our character, and remaining true to our values, remaining true to ourselves. That to me is ultimately what poise is, and you're going to be who you are in the most difficult times, and so the rhetorical question that we always have as an organization, the rhetorical question we always have as leaders is where are we? What is that character going to look like? And so if you become inconsistent, if you become an organization that spotlights only when the pressure's on, then ultimately I think there's some cracks that may show up when times get real tough.
Well taken, Greg. Thanks. We'll come back to you. Let's bring in Admiral Scott Moore here. Scott, one of the things that you're known for speaking a lot about is what does it mean to be a leader? As you're leading men into dangerous environments, or if you're, with your folks on the home front and you're, trying to get them to rally behind what you are doing, what does it mean to be a leader?
So first of all, Heather, I want to thank everybody for having me on today. And also, Greg, I think you, that flowed right out of you, man. I mean, you really just, you really explained some really good points that I could actually understand quite well just by feeling your passion. And so when you ask, Heather, what do I think it means to be a leader? It's a deep question because I think it's the most important thing to understand in any organization, group, or team. And what it means to be a leader is real simple. That's your job, first of all. At a minimum, you have the final say, okay? But the goal should be to have it mean so much more, and where ultimately you have an immeasurable impact on that group. And so I will tell you, I had a commitment for 5 years after the Air Force Academy. I could have gotten out. Right about that time, I was knee deep in my operational tours. That's you have 2-year tours, as every officer in the military rotates his job after 2 years. And I was on my 3rd tour, and I was offered another operational role again on the 4th one. And so I found myself after the 5 years getting out for 25 more years. So I was in for 30 and I was getting out periodically every other tour. And I know Greg knows exactly what I'm talking about. And what kept me in was the satisfaction and fulfillment I got from actually accepting the challenge of being a leader. But I think what's most important I could convey is it wasn't about me. It was about that every time I finished that tour, I was part of something. This is kind of an overused cliche, but it was way more important than me. It was way bigger than me. And therefore, it wasn't something that I could say, me, I did this. It was we did it. And that satisfaction, and even when you minimize the we, the me even more, and the we becomes what you stand for, there's no greater fulfillment. That's what kept me in for 25 years. I want to go over a couple of things. First of all, like I said, it's a leader's job to basically have the final decision. I also think you have so much more to do. Ultimately, you point the way as well. And I think how you succeed as a leader, I think there's a few things. I look at the term followership. If you think you're so much in charge, who's really following you, okay? And I don't mean Alexander the Great, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. I'm talking day to day. Who says, yeah, we're good. We'll do what the boss wants us to do. And I think the most important thing as a leader is how do you get from one thing to the next? And what that one thing is this. A lot of people think the military, you can order people around, and you can. And believe it or not, if you don't realize it, you order the heck out of people and corporations as well. Maybe not without saying this is an order. The reason you do it is so people understand clearly what you want them to do. But if you think about this, generally, when you order someone, you're not guaranteed of their product. You may be guaranteed of their execution, doing what you want them to do, but not at a standard that is their high performance. At a minimum, they have to give you the minimum, and the minimum is simply high enough. And so you're ordering. But if you ask them, and what you're really trying to do is to recruit the will of each person to give you their best performance, that takes art, and that takes followership. And first of all, it takes the baseline, what I believe is making a good team. And first of all, the most important thing about a good team is the team attitude. Everyone's more important. The team is more important than any individual. Sometimes you have to prove it. You have to get a couple more things in that team, and then you can start going after it and executing. That is loyalty and trust. And to me, loyalty, I once had, Greg, what's interesting is I worked for 2 or 3 3-star generals, worked for a few admirals as well, but all my real deep lessons learned, especially follow me, are from Army top generals who were mentored as well. And one of the things is this, loyalty, as one guy told me, goes both ways. When I say I want my folks to be loyal to me, that means I want them to represent our organization very well, both in and off the job, okay? But they want me to be loyal to them. Sometimes I have to protect my folks. Sometimes they have made a mistake or screwed up or whatever, and I have to protect them. That develops loyalty to them. But the easiest way to develop loyalty is to totally care about your people. Get to know them, get to know their issues at home, their interests in life, start talking to them outside of the role, that individual job role, develop this relationship, especially if they have issues and you can go out of your way and care for them, okay? And the other thing is this. So therefore, we were going into Tora Bora. This is Tora Bora 2. This is around 2007, 2008. We thought we saw a white man in a robe, okay? We probably did several times. And so we went in there with Army Rangers and SEALs all over the mountaintops and these big old Army helicopters around the clock. And we were running ourselves ragged. We were so tired, about 4 days into it, no sleep. We're all gathered around this table we call a sand table. It shows the terrain. And my Army boss looks at me. He was basically a 3-star that would basically run as fast as any one of us. And he says, come on, guys, we got to finish this up. And I have another senior Army enlisted man who's been in for 23 years. He looks at me and says, you know what? I've worked for this guy for decades, and he's always in front of us, leading as hard as he can. I'd walk off a cliff for this guy. So let's saddle up. What loyalty gives you is the most important tool you need, is when nobody wants to do what you want them to do, they do it for you, okay? And so, the last thing about leadership I mentioned is this, followership. And so a couple things, look up all the definitions of emotional intelligence. That'll really help you get there. But the other thing is you got to communicate all the time. Every time I was ever in any team I was ever in, the question was why? Simon Sinek, start with why. I'm not really talking about that deep. If you have purpose, a real deep purpose, it'll carry the day for so good. But if you don't, like if you make little widgets on a machine or something, you still need to know, why are we doing this way? And so you have to talk to your people all the time, because every team is changing all the time. So just because you talked to them last week doesn't mean it's the same team. People leave, people come in. And so you have to tell them why. And so and also it shows that you respect them enough to let them know why. And you put out those questions before they start, and pretty soon you're executing. Ultimately, followership also means that you care, and finally that you commit. You're there from the beginning to the end, and you're gonna take the heaviest load, but you're gonna display, you're gonna spread out to them all the gratitude and take all the negative impact when it comes at you. And you have to realize being a leader is probably 50% bad times. Okay, it may sound great when your team is kicking butt, but think about some of these losing coaches. It's the same thing in every organization. On a bad day, that's when the real leadership has to kick in. You got to have resilience. We say everybody wants to be a SEAL leader on a warm, sunny day and flat seas. Okay, wait till the seas are rough. That's when the leaders step up to the plate. And I'll pass it on to you.
Scott, that's terrific. I would like to ask you one follow-up question before we move on to Tracey. One of the things it's important to think about is keeping the members of your team. Once you recruit people, once you've got them on board, and you talked about treating people well and care about that, but recruitment and retention is such an important factor in today's workplace. Could you talk with us a little bit about that and the importance of working together as a team when everybody may not be as skilled as the other?
Yeah, this is pretty huge, because ultimately you're talking retention. And for even like for us, we've even done, the commercial world can certainly compensate big time to help people stay on board. But I think where you want to get is where actually the pay doesn't matter. Okay, where people want to be part of this team, and people wake up and say, I got to go to work early, honey. I am on a really good project and I got to nail it. Okay, you want people so motivated that basically they can't wait to get to work. And that's I hate to say it, you want a loving team that's like a family. And when you're in a really good team, I call it a force-filled bubble, where basically you protect your team. Okay. My baseline in the SEALs, it's a SEAL platoon. Okay. It's between 16 and 20 guys, and it has 2 leaders, 2 officers, one in charge and the second guy is the backup. And then about 15, 16 enlisted guys. And you do everything together. You compete every workout, you train together all the time. And, and good teams are, that's what you want to be. Retention is a really good team. And there, I'll tell you about some things about a good team. A really good team has humor, and they heckle each other and they rib each other, but what a really good team does, and this is once again, what causes people to want to stay there, is they embrace failure. They embrace failure. In other words, I don't think you learn too much from your successes. I think you learn from your failures, as long as you capture the lesson and then either tweak it and do. And that's a really sign of an organization that is always on an uphill growth. It's when organizations are flatline, status quo, people get bored. Okay. Mm-hmm. The last thing I'll say, and I could probably talk about each one of these topics for a couple hours, but it's a good thing that we're limited here. The last thing I'll say is this. I think it's important to recognize that you have a lot of different types of people on the team. Okay. And the way you keep people on a team, like let's say, everybody wants to, who's the most important person in an organization? In our SEAL team, it's probably the SEALs. But the SEALs are 1/3 of every organization in the SEAL teams. The rest are all the other specialties needed to run that team, including some other warfare specialties that may go out in the target. And I will tell you, you have to feed and care, or provide maintenance. In other words, you have to care for everyone in that team. And once in a while, you have to, I had a deal one time where I gave a big lecture to the whole team. I came back from Afghanistan. We had a pretty rough couple months. And so we'd lost some total team leaders in our team. And I came back and I went through all the departments and divisions. And I talked about who the highest priority folks were. They were basically the guys going on target, which could mean communicators as well as EOD guys, in addition to, and dog handlers, in addition to our SEALs. And I said, who's in second place? Who's the second priority? I said, every single other specialty is knocking at the door as the highest priority, because this command is in a critical position, doing critical things, and everyone here, it has a critical role. And so I said, because we're on our heaviest task right now, the nation's calling us, I need you to provide extra attention to your job every day right now. I got back to my office. I had a lot of my former senior enlisted guys who mentored me as I grew up in the SEALs. They were all civilians now, and they all send me decent emails. They liked the way that I brought up, that I had really talked about what was going on and why. But I had an email from a lady, and I talked about these 2-year assignments. It'd been my 4th time at this SEAL team. Same SEAL team that did Captain Phillips. My 4th time, so it was a total of 8 or 9 years. And it was from a woman who, she said, Captain, I was a Navy captain. She said, you sure have matured. And that wasn't really a compliment. But then she said, I want to tell you that I've never fully understood how important my role is here. And I've been here for over 23 years, as I do right now, the way you explained it. Okay, no, I just did it instinctively. I didn't plan that to say that.
But to that point, to that point, Scott, about maturity, and that someone recognized that in you, and that's something that Tracey talks about a lot, that sort of emotional maturity and getting that kind of professional maturity in the workplace. Age doesn't always equate with maturity, as we've all found in our respective organizations. So Tracey, could you talk a little bit about that professional maturity in the workplace, and then we'll come back to everybody and we'll pull in some questions from the audience.
Absolutely. And Scott and Greg, really tying in with what you said, you hit a lot on, especially Scott, the term followership. So professional maturity really in today's leadership lingo is really emotional intelligence, or EQ. And that's really, really important. And before you go, oh my gosh, we're getting into this touchy-feely stuff, because a lot of people of us are in the military and we're task oriented. Okay, let's just get the job done. We'll worry about feelings, when we get back to home base. But interestingly enough, you really have to focus on your IQ as well as your EQ. And the leadership literature clearly points out that intentionality will trump capability every time. And I always tell leaders, and after working in different organizations with people for coming up on 3 decades, you really look and find out that there's either a skill problem or a will problem. Okay, now a skill problem, you give them the resources, you give them the training. A will problem is something intrinsic that only they can really fix. You as a leader can be responsible to people, but we're not responsible for people. And that's where we really get into, Heather, and for everybody listening, the emotional intelligence. And there's just 3 real quick aspects I want to touch on. And Danny Goleman, who was an American psychologist who really talked about the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence, there's 3 that I really want to focus on in our brief time today, and that's motivation, self-awareness, and self-regulation, or as we in the military like to call it, self-discipline. So before anything can function in an organization, you have to make sure that you are bringing followers on your team who are all in, not 90% in, not 99% in, all in. What do they say? Close only counts in, what is it? Horseshoes, hand grenades, and atomic bombs. Okay, you got to be all in, or it's nothing. The Bible has a verse: a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. So the most important thing when you're bringing people on your team, and the gentleman hit on this too, to continually go back and make sure that they get this, is that they are all in with your vision and your mission. Everything starts from there, because if they're not all in, it's like in aviation, if you're 1 degree off, by the time you get to the end of your flight, you're going to be on a different continent. So to limit scope creep and mission drift, you want to make sure that everybody is really all in. And that's called value congruence. You want to make sure that everybody in your organization is all in with your mission. And you say, well, how do you do that? Well, you ask them. And especially when you're onboarding people, be very frank with them and say, hey, if you're not all in with this, let's figure out where you need to be right from the start, because it's like marrying somebody that you have reservations about, right? Does it ever get better? No, it gets worse. So you really want to focus on that and understand that there is a value congruence and they're all in. The next one we talk about is self-awareness. And I like to ask people, you are either a thermostat or a thermometer. Okay, so a thermostat is something that is active. All right, if you go into an organization, your energy, your atmosphere, you turn up the heat, you turn up the energy, or you're a thermometer. Okay, where you go in, if the organization is cold and toxic, guess what? You start sucking your thumb and you become cold and toxic too. All right, so self-awareness is really how open are you to understanding the energy that you bring into the room. And there's another leadership term called emotional contagion. All right, you think the coronavirus can take off, so can your emotions. All right, nothing will kill an organization, I don't care what the leader does or says, more than toxic, horrible attitudes. So as far as professional maturity, you need to nip that stuff in the bud. It's almost like a cancer cell. Oh, the body looks healthy, but you have just one cell that starts going awry and the infection starts happening. So it's so important, really important to let people know and that they're going to be willing to accept feedback. And folks, we talked a lot about seasoning, Heather, and maturity. I can remember many times throughout my career, even as a cadet at the academy or as a young officer, where somebody had the grace and the good senses to pull me aside and go, hey, LT, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but this is how you're coming across. Thank God they did, okay? Because I tell people, it's like you're a wine bottle, okay? And I can only read my label from the inside out, but I don't know, I can't see how I'm being perceived by others. And that's where self-awareness comes in. Get with other people in your organization and say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. Is this how I'm coming across? And then the last one, of course, is self-discipline, because you can be the most aware person in the world, but if you don't set up wonderful habits and are conscientious, you're not going to be able to execute. In other words, you can be all in and integrate the mission and embrace the mission, but you can't do your job properly unless you have this intense sense of self-discipline. And I love, there's a little booklet called The New Common Denominator Success. And Albert Ian Gray, and speaking about the American College, he gave this speech probably 50 years ago at an insurance forum. And he said, the only difference between a success and a failure is that a success has made a habit about doing the things a failure doesn't want to do. So the other thing with professional maturity is just do it. Message of Garcia. Don't wait for your boss to tell you. Don't wait for your teammates. Vision is seeing what needs to be done and then doing it. So there's this poetry and this plumbing. I'm all in with my heart, but I'm willing to put my boots on the ground and get my hands dirty and turn those wrenches and execute the mission. So just professional maturity. One of my favorite quotes from one of my heroes, General George Patton, he said, "Staff officers of inharmonious disposition, irrespective of their ability, must be removed. A staff cannot function properly unless it is a united family." And you think, good Lord, Patton, wasn't he yelling at everybody all the time? Yeah, but he got that we have to have each other's backs, and we have to speak truth and love, and we have to be able to call each other out when there's immature attitudes and behaviors and habits going on in the workforce, because otherwise all ships rise together. And if you have a leak in one of those ships, you're going to see the organization start to go down. So just those are the things really for professional maturity. And to Scott's point about followership, guess what? That is on every individual in the organization, okay? That's not on the leader. This is the responsibility of the follower. And if followership is beneath you, if you can't take criticism and constructive feedback, then leadership is going to be above you. And as my dad said, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But you can put salt in his oats and make him thirsty. So we as leaders set the professional form for how people behave, but then it's up to them to go take a drink and be a good part of the stable.
There's so much packed in there. One question I'd like to ask of all of you before we get to audience questions. Tracey, and each of you talk about leadership and the importance of that, caring about your team, taking care of your team, getting people to do it, to take that initiative. And toxic environments, we have all seen, can poison a workplace. Tracey, you just referred to basically removing some of those bad apples. But one of the questions I want to ask of each of you is, how do you get people to have that attitude where they care so much about the mission that they will take that initiative and they will just do it without having to be asked time and time again? Greg, you want to take that one on?
Sure, thanks, Heather. So I think philosophically, my approach with the organization is about three words: trust, empower, and again, holding accountable. And so trust, you know, the obvious word, the obvious connotation of trust is extending trust to individuals, but it's like Scott and Heather both mentioned, you know, it's communication. It's effective communication. You got to make sure that the organization is on the same sheet of music, and that the expectations are well understood. You've got a clear vision, a clear mission, a clear intent, so that when everything goes south, everybody knows what the ultimate goal is, and you trust that they have a path to get there. Empowering, you know, leaders. We've all told our boss we did something, and we told them how we did it, perhaps, and they said, well, I would have done it this way. Well, you've taken the power, you've unempowered your organization. When you're leading an organization, you got to be willing to live with their solutions. Again, I want many thinking on how to solve a problem versus them trying to solve the problem to please me or how I want it to be done. I'm not smart enough to have all the answers. And then finally, Scott touches on them. Look, we got to come back and hold ourselves accountable. We got to come back and learn. It's a cycle, and if you don't make that a habit in your organization, then it becomes someone else's decision, or it's not part of the character of the organization. So that to me is trust, empower, hold accountable.
And in terms of holding accountability, you use the word criticism there, and I want to go to Scott with that. Scott, I'm sure you've had to deliver some very critical messages to your team over the years. How do you do that, and how do you do that in a way that could be well received?
That's an interesting question. I was actually hoping I'd get the initiative on. So I think that I think that a really good team, and we talked about professional maturity deeply here, is already professionally mature and very, very, and they all have the same, I would say everyone's on the team bus. And remember, you have different DNAs and you have different leadership DNAs and followership DNAs in there. But the team bus, everyone's on, or whoever's not, the bus is going to take off. So that's already the baseline here. When something happens, such as something that's ethically unacceptable, to me, that person who's decided to do that has already basically lost their chance to make a play to defend themselves. And if you have established what the values are, you have to act on whatever you said you would do. And the most important thing, more than the person that, let's say I'm punishing a person, or it could be in a real serious manner, very serious manner, especially when we're in combat. Okay, everyone knows the deal. And so if you bypass that and say he's one of your best guys, and you bypass it, you just establish a new standard. Everyone's going to say you're playing favorites, and that starts beginning the dismantling and the cracking of the shell. Okay, you have to hold the line, be who you say you are, do what you say you will do. That upholds the trust they have in you. And at the end, there may be some very disgruntled people, but then it is good to be liked. I think a good leader is usually liked more than disliked. And if you're disliked, it's harder for people to want to follow you. But I would tell you what's more important on that is respect, because respect will ultimately hold together an organization more than like. And you have to hold their respect, and that is that you do what you say you are supposed to do. Okay.
Scott, that's great. I'm taking notes as you're all talking here, as I'm sure the audience is as well. Tracey, I'd like to come back to you, please. And could you talk a little bit about leadership and management, and how leadership and management can actually differ? Just because you're in a position to lead doesn't mean you necessarily are a good leader.
Absolutely. And halfway through my dissertation or my PhD on leadership, I realized there's even another difference between being a leader and engaging in the act of leadership. And I'm like, wow, how many decades did it take me to figure that out? Management is more the tactical, whereas leader and leadership is more the strategic. Okay, so you got the 10,000 versus the 30 or 40,000 foot. So management is where you are entrusted with synchronizing, organizing, and managing tasks, people, processes, and things. In Michael Gerber's The E-Myth Revisited, the manager is really the day-to-day operations type of person. And having been a maintainer in the Air Force, if there's not operations people, the jets don't fly. And if they do, they may not have as many landings as they do taking off. So it's incredibly important. But then you get into the phase of leader and leadership. You're no more in the day-to-day operations, but you are more setting the vision, and you are working with people where you are selecting the best people for the job. You are growing your talent stack, and you are continuing to promote your co-leaders and your succession plan so you can continue to take the organization to the top. So really, leadership is more the people aspect, okay? Bringing out the greatest in people. Now, there is a difference between leader and leadership. You can be an incredible leader and really not very proficient in the act of leadership. And to be honest with you, I had to confront this with myself. Boy, I had my stuff squared away. I ran a tight ship, Scott. I mean, it would have been great. But then, just because I have my stuff together, leadership is where you as the leader take everybody on your ship where they want to go, you collectively. And so it's a very nuanced difference, but I had to, in humility, really go, okay, how can I get better in engaging the art of leadership, which is really getting the right people in the right places and getting them out together. And to Scott's point, in leadership literature, there's implicit leadership theory and implicit followership theory. And it's just like picking somebody to marry or being unequally yoked. Certain followers are going to really resonate with your type of leadership. And certain leaders, when I was a follower, there's certain leaders that I would follow into battle. There are other ones that I thought, as soon as I find another job, I'm tenuring my 2-week notice. Okay. So you want to make sure there's that again, congruence and resonance with not everybody probably really looked at Patton and said, this guy does it for me. But for the time that he was, there were enough people that did. So that's kind of the difference between management, leader, and leadership.
Greg, in your years and as you have consulted with teams like the New York Giants, they're wondering about hiring. And when you're bringing people on a team, whether it's the players themselves or the coaches or the people behind the organization that make everything work, what do you think? And I should mention, these are some of the questions coming in from the audience. What do you think the most important quality is in hiring someone?
Thanks for that question. To me, I think their integrity and their willingness to work hard. As I think of myself as the kind of not the odd man out, but really never the most talented, never the most gifted, but maybe the most dedicated, maybe the most hardworking. Flipping that question around a little bit, my job as a leader is to get the maximum capability out of that person, enable them to be their best. And so I want a team of individuals that are being their best. You can get a bunch of bests in the room, and I've seen that, and that can sometimes be more of a headache than just having an organization of striving to be their best. In my 26 years in the Army, I didn't get to pick my team. Though I got men and women that raised their right hand to support and defend our Constitution. It was my job to get the best out of them.
We just got a question I'd like to read. It's from Chris. I won't give his last name in case he doesn't want to be mentioned, but I love this question. It's having retired from the Air Force after 23 years and currently working in a leadership role in higher education, I found leaders with a military background are more inspiring and trusting of their teams. What can we do to encourage academic leaders to practice the concepts of servant leadership and trust? One of you did use that term, servant leadership, which I just really speaks to me, and I'm sure a lot of others. Let's talk about that. Greg, you want to give it a start, and then go around?
I did, Heather, and I'll be quick. To me, servant leadership, really kind of leads us to this humility that we've talked about. This humility of self-awareness, this humility of where you are. Being able to see yourself not as the leader of the organization or this perfect person, but being willing to look at yourself and understand how you're being received, not necessarily on how you're transmitting. Leadership is not about you, it's about them. It's about the organization, it's about the mission. And I think when you keep that perspective, it keeps you humble and you keep yourself in the right position.
Okay, Scott, I have a question for you. This comes in from Lewis. As trainers and leaders, have you ever sat down at a challenging time or effort and just thought, gosh, that mission was really tough. That decision I had to make was really tough. I hated making that decision. Some people may have been hurt along the way, but I had to make that decision. How do you handle something like that, Scott?
Well, that's a very kind of a deep question. Let me give you an example. I think you just deal with it as you get better and better and better, and you make decisions that have to be made. There's always stakeholders. There's a point where especially if you're a subordinate of someone, you're making a decision against your boss's desires. That's going to be really a hard decision to make. And I'll give you an example. I had a helicopter shot down in Afghanistan. And in this case, nobody was hurt on it, but it was basically a Chinook with about 30 Rangers in the crew. And I had a bunch of guys on the ground still to be picked up. The sun was going to come up in about 15 minutes. My protector of my force, my AC-130 gunship was going to depart. And I was going to get some jets overhead that were not too accurate, previously. And so, and we were in Taliban area, and I felt that my force was going to be totally threatened. And I was told that helicopter was going to have to be disassembled and trucked out or picked up with the praying mantis helicopter that was about 2 days away. And right then in about, I think it was, I don't know how fast my brain works, but I think it was in milliseconds. I knew what I needed to do. And right then my boss called me, and he'd been watching my screens from the drones of my missions in Iraq. And he calls me and says, "Hey, Scotty, what do you think? I see you have a problem." I go, "Yes, sir, I have a helicopter shot down. I'm going to blow it up." And he immediately told me the hell I was going to do that. We're the United States of America. We can protect this aircraft. We've done it throughout, right? And this is probably the man that I respect the most of all military leaders I ever worked for. And I recognize that, hey, he doesn't understand where I am. I had situational awareness. I think the key on all decisions is you have to have overall situational awareness, so you have all impacts of it and you know the ramifications. And my priorities were ultimately to avoid Arlington Cemetery at all costs, unless it was on an offensive nature for us. And I knew that this was not in our mission priorities to protect a vehicle or an aircraft. And so we debated it, and he called me back ultimately and asked me if I'd made a decision. I asked him, let me ask you a question, sir. Are you gonna let me run my mission? He said, "I am." And then he cussed, and then he hung up. And I looked over at my fires officer and I said, "Blow that thing up before he calls me back." And I did. And it was a $40 million aircraft. And then immediately his 4-star boss called him and told him that he wanted me investigated. And my boss basically told him, "No, investigate me." And then a guy later on,
that's leadership on his part.
Yeah, and a guy later on came up to me, running up, my fires guy, and said, "Sir, I got to tell you, that's either the dumbest or the boldest decision I've ever seen." And I said to him, I knew what I needed to do. And it's, we can talk about the right thing. There's that theme, the right thing, but it was by far the right thing to do. You got to take all the math into account. I said, it was the right thing to do. And hey, think about this. What a great way to get fired, because I don't want to stay in the military my entire life and miss the rest of the things I want to do in life. And the boys will think I'm their hero. Yeah. Right. So I'll walk away on martyr.
This gets back to the idea of trust your people in the field. Trust your troops on the ground. You were there.
Right.
The commander was not.
And ultimately, that's exactly what my boss thought. Here's the more funny thing about that. The next day he came to Afghanistan on his normal scheduled weekly visit for about 3 days. When I went into his office there, he never brought the helicopter up the rest of our career together, ever. From that moment. He just basically just, I used to put him, and here's another thing about, I know I'm getting off on the topic of how do you make decisions that impacts a lot of people. But here's the other thing about leading from the front. You see a lot of these leaders get out and about, and they are basically approachable, and they're connected with their people. And that's the most important thing. It's a very oiled artery system where, very well functional circulation system where the boss knows what's going on. This boss right here, that night when he didn't mention the helicopter, instead, the first thing he asked me was, "What mission am I going on tonight?" This is a 3-star general that I would put with SEALs or Rangers whenever he showed up and go out on missions with them. And what you learn from what the people take from the boss being part of coming and visiting them and occasionally doing their role, it means everything, because he's willing to basically get to know what they go through. And it's just very important.
Yeah, I want to bring back in Tracey. We've been talking about examples of good leadership here, as Scott just illustrated, but there are unfortunately examples of poor leadership. Many of us have worked in those kinds of environments where you've seen good and you've seen bad. So how do you stay focused and dedicated if you're working, whether it's in corporate America or in the military, under poor leadership?
Well, you can learn something from everybody. I think there's a Mark Twain quote that says that. And just like we learn more from our failures than our successes, you honestly can take quite a lot away from bad bosses about how not to be a bad boss. And I once heard a CEO say that he never had a good boss in his entire career. And I just kind of laugh because, if you're blessed with a good boss or 2 good bosses in your career, that's awesome. In the military, we have more than our share of great ones, but you get on the outside and they're few and far between. That being said, said, kind of back to Scott's point, I'm sure Greg would echo this. I don't care how horrible your boss is. No one can make you do something illegal, immoral, or unethical. That's where you have to stand up and say, I'm not going to do it. I would also say your boss, again, is at a different level. There may be things going on that they have to account for that you're not aware of. I can remember when I was a mid-level officer, I just assumed I knew everything that was going on at the 4-star level. I did not. Okay, so we have to remember that there's a lot of things that the leadership has to deal with that you may or may not be privy to. And you are jumping to conclusions when you assume that they're a poor leader just because you're not in the know. Number 3, say something to them. Okay, in addition to being all in, the second key element to building a beautiful, phenomenal, tremendous team is critical thinking skills. Not critical spirit, where you're sitting there trashing your boss on Facebook or trying to be insubordinate behind their back. But when you let them know, hey, boss, this is what's going on. The greatest leaders have had people around them that are willing to call them on their stuff and say, that was a bad decision, or, to come back and do a hot wash and flesh it out. So that's really poor leadership. Give the leader a break. We think that leaders are mind readers, and they're not. And if you've got something going on, do them a solid, like people have done for all of us, and let us know when things were going to go off the rails.
Mm-hmm. Greg, I want to ask you a question that came in from a retired Army veteran. And I think this one's really, really important. It says, as a retired Army veteran and now a leadership coach for financial advisors, I tell them that the trust they inspire with their clients is at least as important or more so than their technical competence as financial advisors. Really good point. How do you reinforce something like that in your view, Greg?
I think reinforcing trust is also about it's about your honesty and your authenticity as a person. They're the leaders that look like they come out of a Vogue magazine or whatever. They never made a mistake. They never have never screwed things up. And so I think at the end of the day, especially as those have been around longer, know that there's those kind of people who really don't exist. My emphasis on establishing trust is about being authentic, my humility, and being human. I mean, and as much as I can share my successes, I gotta be honest and share my failures.
That's a great point. Tracey, I want to ask you about political challenges. This comes in from Robert. He writes, you can be a leader, but the organization above you is laced with politics. And he cites Afghanistan and the decisions there as an example of what he sees as poor leadership. So to each of you, how do you work around some of those political challenges? And there's probably no environment that's more political than the military, as a lot of you would probably agree. How do you work around that?
Well, I think getting back to it, when we sign on with the military, we lay down everything to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So as long as everything orients back to that, you will not have your soul or your values or your convictions ruffled. Okay. I mean, I think about Hacksaw Ridge. If anybody hasn't watched that movie, that is the most beautiful movie about how you maintain your duty while keeping true to your convictions. But unfortunately, everything has gotten so politicized, from medicine to you name it. It's just something you really have to keep good boundaries about it and stay focused on the intent of the mission, because otherwise it can become quite divisive, as everybody sees. And you just got to let your leaders know, hey, let's no mission scope, mission drift, get back to what we're here to do.
Yeah, that's a tough one. If you see somebody making a bad political decision, it may be unethical in your view. It may not be illegal, but how you just handle that. Mm-hmm. Scott, any thoughts on this?
I think Tracey nailed it. I think that ultimately, it's up to the leaders to clean the house all the time. And I grew up in the era, I think where, and I'm not trying to be political at all, but ultimately, Bill Clinton had a reputation for not, maybe he was a Vietnam protester or something like that, which I actually respect, even though my father was killed in Vietnam. I think that's what the nation's about, is free speech, okay? But whenever things like that have come up in the military, the organizations I was ever with, somebody just shut down that political discussion. You basically say, hey, not at work, leave it at home. Okay. And I actually think that's the healthiest way to have any company or organization operate, is you keep politics and religion out of the workplace. And you have to have someone that's the sheriff. It may not be, here's what's key for everyone, this is a very predominantly veteran audience. When I came into the Navy, and it's the same position throughout, they tell officers to listen to their chief. Okay. And I'm the recipient of fantastic mentors on my senior enlisted guys, but that's usually the guy who was the mature guy, not necessarily, and it doesn't have to be the leader. It's someone in there that is the mature voice. And then I want to talk about, last thing is this, I know we're getting close to the end of time. There's two things, and this is the same topic though. It's positional and situational. And I'll get the actual academic version of it from Tracey because she's brilliant here. But to me, situational or positional is I'm the vice president, I'm the managing director, or I'm the CEO. Positional, you know what you're supposed to do. There's a whole lot of leaders, but not that many that lead. Okay. But situational is this, and it goes into the initiative as well. You have all these people, but all of a sudden someone takes charge. I look at those people if they're below me as that person who takes charge is my future leader. And I don't have to kick him in the butt. I got to hold him back. That's a jackpot. Okay. But situational leadership is where you want to be, where your team, as Greg mentioned, is empowered. Okay. And then you also have this much, there's a youthfulness of a good team, and it may be a bunch of old people that feel youthful. But the most mature mind is the one that has to say, keep it out of the workplace. Here's what we're here for. I also believe a leader always has to say, we're a team, we're a team, we're a team. And the last thing I'll say is this: mentoring matters. It totally matters. I had a CO one time, a commanding officer, tell me when I was very young, and it's funny, I was getting punished for my guys getting in trouble in a bar, and the next day we were smoking our other platoons in a physical fitness routine. He came over and asked me, he said, "You having fun?" I said, "Yes, sir. We smoked these other platoons." He said, "I don't pay you to have fun. I pay you to lead, damn it. I pay you to lead." And he walked off. And I remember thinking, that's pretty darn clear. We're a team, and I pay you to lead.
Although I would add, sometimes if you love your job, if you love your career, it is fun. So
it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. It doesn't have to be fun to be fun, but fun's what it's all about.
Yeah. Greg, go right ahead, and we'll get final thoughts. Go right ahead, Greg.
Okay. Well, sometimes when people talk about politics, they use that as an excuse. They use that excuse not to step up, not to let themselves off the hook, or not display personal courage. The Constitution gives our Congress the power of the purse. So every single promotion that every person in the military has is political because Congress signs off on it. They sign that. So, that's one of the first things out of my mouth when people start talking about politics. All right, forget it. We have no control over it. Do our job. Let's not let something that we have no control over distract us from doing what we need to do. So that's my quick point about politics.
That's a great point. Tracey, your final thoughts.
Just that my dad would always say that you're going to be the same person 5 years from now that you are today, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read. So keep hanging out with tremendous leaders and keep reading tremendous books, and you will keep continuing that journey.
Oh, that's great. Well, speaking of books, someone wrote in and said, will the panel get together and write a power book on leadership? So
I know a good publisher. We'd love to do that.
I think that's a terrific idea. This is recorded, so I hope we'll be able to share it with some others. Your insights have just been incredible. Each of you has had a phenomenal career. You've given so much, not only to your country, to the men and women who have worked for you and alongside to us, and your servant leadership continues. It continues today, even though each of you have left the military. So thank you so much for your time. Greg Gadson, God bless. Thank you. And I look forward to one day soon. Scott, big hugs to you. Thank you. And Tracey Jones, thank you for everything you've done. Lots of questions. We did a chance to answer all of them, but we might be able to do a follow-up. Greg, Tracey, Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather.
Happy Veterans Day, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
Heather, thank you so much for moderating.
Jim, thank
Just
you.
great. And to all of our panelists, outstanding, just absolutely outstanding. I did want to mention on behalf of the American College Center for Veteran Affairs, thank you again for attending today. The college has a number of webcasts planned in the future. Also, please help spread the word that we do continue to have scholarships available for those military members and military spouses. And if you're feel compelled to give, please consider doing that as well. And again, thank you so much. We welcome your feedback. To all the participants listening in today, we're so grateful that you did. And again, a special thanks to all of our veterans on here that were so gracious in their time, and certainly to Heather, thank you for your time. And thank you all for what you continue to do for all of our military families, and for our great nation. Thank you so much, and happy Veterans Day.